B'siyata Deshmai, we're going to learn Rosh Hashanah Daf, the very first Mishnah in Masechet Rosh Hashanah. Arba Rosh Hashanah Heim. There are 4 dates in the year, 4 times of the year, that are considered Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, the beginning of the year. The first one, Be'echod B'Nisan, on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, Rosh Hashanah leMelachim v'leRegalim. It's considered a Rosh Hashanah regarding the Melachim, the kings. It was common practice back in the days that when they would write a document, a legal document, they would write, and they would do this out of respect for the kings, in order to keep peace with the kings, they would write that the transaction took place in a certain month of such and such a year from the beginning of the rule of such and such a king. And the question is, when is the beginning of the year? At what point do we mark the beginning of the year of the kings? Is the first of Nisan. Ula Regalim, and also regarding the Shloisha Regalim, there's a sequence of Yomim Tovim, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, the first of them being Pesach, the month in which the first of the Regalim, of the Yomim Tovim, fall is Nisan. That's the Echod B'Nisan. The ramifications of this we'll see in the Gemara. So that was the first Rosh Hashanah. The second Rosh Hashanah is Be'echod Be'elul Rosh Hashanah L'Maiser Behema. On the first day of Elul is considered a Rosh Hashanah regarding Maiser Behema. We know there's halacha that a person has to take Maiser Minat Torah not only from his grains, from the dogon, but also from his animals. Every 10th animal has to be given as Maiser. With the halachas of Maisers, we'll be learning later on in Shas about that. And we know that the way they would count the sheep all together, the behemoths, the animals, they would count them all, they would put them all into a pen, they would leave one by one. Every 10th one was Asiri Kodesh, was Maisa. And the halacha is that you count each year's sheep on their own. The question is, at what point does a new year start? Says the Gemara, this is the opinion we'll see of Rabbi Meir, which is Be'echod Be'elul. Rabbi Loz Rabbi Shimon Be'echod B'Tishri. Rabbi Loz and Rabbi Shimon, they say it's actually the first of Tishri that marks the year of Maiser Behema. Be'echod B'Tishri, Rosh Hashanah L'Shonim. The first of Tishri that we know is Rosh Hashanah, is the Rosh Hashanah for Shonim. We'll see in the Gemara what that means exactly on Daf Ches. U'L'Shmitin, U'Le'Yovlois, for Shmita and Yovel. We know that during Shmita and Yovel one's not allowed to plow, one's not allowed to plant. Min HaTorah, that starts at the beginning of the year. That year starts on the first of Tishri, on Rosh Hashanah. What we know is Rosh Hashanah. Ulenetia, regarding the years of Orla, of a young tree, that the first 3 years of a young tree are considered Orla, one's not allowed to benefit from them. When does that year start? Or when do those years get counted from? It's from the first of Tishri. Ule Yerokis, and similarly regarding the Maiser of vegetables. The vegetables are, one takes Maiser from them, and unlike trees, where the point in time that determines which year they belong to is the Chanota, is when they've come to a certain point of maturity. With vegetation, with vegetables, it's when you actually pick them. And if you pick vegetables over a span of time, you cannot take Maiser from one year of produce to a different year of produce. What point marks a new year? As far as Yerokis are concerned, it's from Rosh Hashanah, the first of Tishri. Regarding Ilonos, Be'echod B'Shvat, on the first of Shvat is Rosh Hashanah Le'ilon, the Maiser of fruits of a tree, which are dependent on whether the Chanota, not the picking, but the stage called Chanota, which is a discussion exactly what that is, but when it becomes a certain level of blossoming or maturing or ripening, is a question in the Rishonim exactly what Chanota means. But according to Kedivri Beis Shammai, if the Chanota took place before the first of Shvat, that's 1 year. Any fruits that the Chanota took place after Rosh Chodesh Shvat is already the next year, and Chumas and Maisros have to be taken on each year's produce independently. Beis Hillel say it's not the first of Shvat, it's the 15th of Shvat, and this is what we know as Tu B'Shvat. Says the Gemara, L'Melachim, we saw that the first of Nisan is considered the Rosh Hashanah for Melachim, for the kings. L'may Hilchasa, what halachic ramifications would it have? Why do kings need to have a certain point in time where a year starts? Why don't you say that every king, depending on when he became the king, that will be the beginning of his year? If a king became a king in Nisan, so Nisan will be the beginning of this king's year. If a king became a king in Sivan, then every Sivan will be the beginning of a new year. Why do we need a fixed date that determines a new year? Lamai Hilchasa, Omar of Chizda Lishtoris. It's very important to determine whether exactly, and we'll soon see the example, but it's important to know when one writes a document, a legally binding document, for example, we're talking about a document which is to do with a loan. If somebody lent money, a borrower lent money from the lender, and they would write, the months would have been Nisan Iyar Sivan. So they would write in the month of Kislev, from third year of a certain king, that's when the loan took place. And then the example we're going to be speaking about is as follows. Let's take that case. There was a document, a shtar, where the borrower came to two witnesses and said, it's true that you don't know exactly, you're not seeing a loan right now, but I'm the borrower, so I'm allowed to ask you to write me a loan, because to write me a document, the document's against me. The document is that I owe money to the lender. So I'm asking you to Eidim, write me a document that I admitted that in the month of Kislev, I borrowed money from the lender. Okay, what actually happened? These two Eidim knew that in Tammuz, in the third year of this king, this borrower actually borrowed the money from the lender. The question is that they wrote in the document Kislev, because that's what the borrower asked them to write. But they knew that Tammuz is when the loan actually took place. The question is Kislev before Tammuz or is Kislev after Tammuz? So if you start on Nisan, we know that obviously Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, first is Tammuz, and then is Kislev, which means that the date in the shtar is after the time when the loan actually took place. But just imagine that with every king, the year started whenever that king first became king. So if this king became a king any time between Tammuz and Kislev, so then the third year of that king, Kislev, is actually before Tammuz, which means that the document which says Kislev in the third year of that king is actually predated, not post-dated. And it's very important for us to know whether a document is predated or post-dated. Why? Because the halacha is that a lender has a lien on the property that belongs to the borrower from the time when he borrowed the money. Which means that if the borrower had a certain field or a house and he owned it at the time that he borrowed money from the lender, and then he sold it to somebody else, but he didn't pay the loan, the lender can actually take the field, the property has a lien on it, and he can take that property away. So if you post-date a document, then all that's happened is that the lender is losing the lien on the property from the time of the loan to the time of the document. But if you predate it, that means that the lender is actually going to be able to take property away from people that doesn't come to him. Because if you predate it, then the lender will say, this property was yours at the time when it says in the document the loan took place, I have a lien on it, when the truth is you don't have a lien on it because he sold it before the loan actually took place. And therefore the halacha is, there's a Mishnah, Ditnan, we learned in a Mishnah, in Masechet Shvius, it says that Shtori Choiv, these documents of loans, Hamukdomin, Psulim, the predated ones, are completely parcel. We give him even a penalty. We say, if you predate a loan, a document of a loan, not only are we not going to allow you to have a lien on the properties and take properties away from that were sold to other people, but we're not even going to allow you to claim from the properties of the person of the borrower that he still has under his ownership, because we're going to give him that penalty. We're going to say this has the same halachas as a milva al peh. And the halacha is there's no lien on any properties with a loan that was not documented in a document. So that's if it's mukdomin. However, if it's mu'uchorin, if it's post-dated, ksherin, it's kosher. because we're not going to take anything away from anybody unlawfully. But if you don't have a specific date when every king, all kings start their years that date, will always be confusion. Just a minute. Kislev of the third year, Tammuz of the third year, which comes first? When does the year start? When did he become a king? Did he become king between Kislev and Tammuz, in which case Tammuz is first, or between Tammuz and Kislev, in which case Kislev is first? We're not going to know, is it predated or post-dated? Therefore the Chachamim said, every king on the first of Nisan marks the beginning of the next year. So if you're starting from Nisan, Tammuz is always going to be before Kislev, and that's why it was important to have a Rosh Hashanah L'Malachim. Continues the Gemara Tonu Rabbanon. We're going to learn in a brisa. Melech she'omad be'esrim v'tisha be'adar. A king who became the king on the 29th of Adar, the very last day before the first of Nisan. Kivan she'igia echod b'Nisan. The next day, echod b'Nisan arrives. Also lo yishono, it's already the beginning of the second year. Ve'im lo omad elo be'echod b'Nisan. But if he only became a king on the first of Nisan, ein moini lo yishono ad she'yagia Nisan acher. Then the Nisan he became king is his first year, and his second year will only start a whole year later, which means that he could have become king, a difference of one day, a day earlier, and the next day is already year 2. A day later he becomes king, year 2 starts a whole year later, which means that every first of Nisan we add another year to this kingdom, to the years of this king, and from the time he became king till Nisan is the first year, and then whenever that is, Aleph Nisan becomes the next year. Omar Mar. And now we're going to discuss that brisa we just learnt. Melech she'omad be'esrim v'tisha ba'adar, a king who became a king on the 29th of Adar, the last day of the years of kings. Kivan she'gia echod b'Nisan, the next day, the first of Nisan, also le'ishana, then it's already the 29th of Adar is, so to speak, that was the end of the first year, even though it was just one day, and the next day, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, starts year 2. So that part of the brisa, Hakomash Malon, what's that teaching us? The Nisan Rosh Hashanah L'Malachim, the brisa is telling us what we saw in the Mishnah, that the first of Nisan is the Rosh Hashanah for the Malachim, for the kings. V'yoim echod b'shana choshev shana. The brisa is just trying to impress on us that even if it's just one day, the last day of the year, Chavtes Nisan, that's enough to be considered a year. The Aleph Nisan, the next day, is already considered the second year of that king. The second statement in that brisa, V'im lo omad elo be'echod b'Nisan, if he only became a king on the first of Nisan, ein moinin lo yishono ad she'yagia Nisan acher. We only say that he's finished his first year and he's now starting his second year. The next year, the first of Nisan, says the Gemara Pshita. That part of the brisa is poshet. What's it coming to tell us? Says the Gemara, it's not so straightforward. It's not poshet. Tzricha, we need it to tell us the imno leo me'ador. We're talking about a case where they actually decided that he was going to be a king. They elected him, or they already decided between them, this is going to be our king in Adar. So Ma'odatema, I may have thought, nimnu le taratin shnin, since they already decided he was going to be the king in Adar, then the Adar is the first year, and as soon as Nisan arrives, it's already the second year. Komash Malon, that's what the Brisa is telling us. No. When you decided that he was going to be king, that's not relevant. It's only when you actually did the coronation, when you actually made him the king, and if that was only in Nisan, then what happened in Adar is not relevant, and the Nisan that he became king, that's his first year. Continues the Gemara Tonu Rabbanon. We're now going to see a Brisa with 3 parts in it. And it's going to seem straightforward, and the Gemara is then going to discuss each of these 3 parts independently. First part, Meis Ba'adar, if the previous king died in Adar, V'omad Acher Tachtov, and the second king became king Ba'adar in the same Adar, Moinin Shono Lezeh Ulezeh. Then that previous year is a year which is counted to both kings, because both kings reigned in that year. So you can either say this is the year number X, whatever it is, of the previous king, or year number 1 of the new king. Part 2, Meis B'Nisan, if the previous king died in Nisan, V'omad Acher Tachtov B'Nisan, and the new king became king any time between that Nisan and the end of Adar that year, then Moinin Shono Lezeh Lezeh. Then here again, both kings, that means the end of the reign of the first king, which is when he died, and the beginning of the reign of the second king are in the same year, and therefore that year can be counted to either king. Meis ba'adar v'omad achir tachtov b'Nisan, if the previous king died in Adar, and the new king became a king only in Nisan, then each year only had one king reigning in it, and therefore Moinin Rishono l'Rishon, the previous year is only counted to the king that was in that year, or Shniya l'Sheni, and the second year, the next year, is where the first king was already dead before Aleph Nisan, and the second king only became king after Aleph Nisan, and therefore the second year is only counted from the second king. So that was the three parts in the Brisa. Now the Gemara is going to discuss them. Omar Mar, the first part in the Brisa, Meis ba'ador v'omad acher tachtov ba'ador moinin shono lezeh lezeh. If they both died, the first one died in Adar and the second one became king in Adar, then that year is counted with both. Says the Gemara Pshita, what's the Brisa trying to impress on us? It's logic dictates that. Answers the Gemara, I may have thought, Shata lebeitrei loy moninon, that it's not possible, it doesn't make sense that a single year should be counted to two kings, and therefore, since the previous year was counted for the previous king because he was still alive that year, that year is not counted with a new king. Komash Malon, that's what the Brisa is coming to tell us, that no, since both kings reigned in that year, you can count that year to both kings. The second part in the Brisa, Meis b'Nisan v'omad acher tachtov b'Nisan moinim shono lezeh lezeh. Here again, Pshita, it would seem self-understood that if both kings reigned, that means the first king died at the beginning of the year Nisan, and the second king started in Nisan or any time after that year, then you can count that year to both kings. It's also Poshet. What's the Chiddush in that? Both kings reigned that year. Why shouldn't we be able to count both years? Says the Gemara, no. I may have entertained the thought that when do we say that just one day in the year is considered a year? Is B'Seif Shana is only the end of the year, which means if a new king started on Chof Tes Adar, then maybe only there, that last day of the year, the day that closes the year, that day is what determines that this new king, it's so to speak as if he was there the whole previous year, and therefore you can count that previous year with that king. But I may have thought that if the previous king just reigned one day at the beginning of the new year, Lo Yomrinon, we don't say as if he reigned in that year and as if that whole year can be attributed to whichever year it was to that previous king. Komash Malon, the Chiddush is coming to teach us that's not the case. That even if the previous king survived just one day in this new year and then died, this year can be attributed to him as well, and both kings can be counted that year. Komash Malon. And now the third and final part of the Brisa, Meis ba'adar v'omad acher tachtov b'Nisan moinin rishono l'Rishon u'shniya l'Sheni, that if the first king died in Adar, which was the previous year, and the new king became king in Nisan, the new year, then each king is only counted that year. Pshita, that also goes without saying. Says the Gemara, Lo tzricha de'imno leo me'adar. Says over here, the Chiddush is that what happens if imno leo ba'adar? That they already decided he was going to be the king in Adar. But that alone wouldn't be a good enough reason for the Brisa to tell us this, because we already saw this previously. So, but besides the fact that they already decided he was going to become the king in Adar, he was also Melech ben Melechu. He was the king, the new king was the son of the previous king, and therefore it was naturally lent itself to him becoming the king. So I may have thought he's also the son, and he's inheriting the kingdom. And also, it was unanimously decided upon and elected that he was going to become the king. Maybe in that case, then I would have thought, then this new king, even though the coronation itself was only in Nisan, but since it was so clear he was going to become the king in Adar, maybe Adar is also counted as his year, and the Nisan will be the second year. Komash Malon, that no. Since he actually only became king in Nisan, we only start counting the years with that king in Nisan. Continues the Gemara. Omer Rabbi Yochanan. The Mishnah started that Rosh Hashanah leMelachim is Aleph Nisan. Where would we have source to that? Shenemar, we see it from the Psukim, because it says in the Pasuk in Melachim, Vayihi b'shmoinim shana v'arba me'is shana l'tzeis b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. It was 480 years after Klal Yisrael went out of Mitzrayim, Bashana Haravias, in the fourth year of Shlomo Melech's reign, B'choder Ziv in the month of Iyar. Hu chodesh hasheni lemelech Shlomo al Yisrael. This was the second month of the 4th year of Shlomo Melech's reign on Klal Yisrael. Vayiven habayis l'Hashem, and he built the Beis Hamikdash for Hashem. So in this one pasuk, Makish, it's written near each other, put together. We compare Malchus Shlomo when it says in the pasuk Limloich Shlomo al Yisrael liYitzias Mitzrayim. It puts together with the Shmoinim Shon of Arba Meis Shon, or L'Tzeis B'nei Yisrael Meretz Mitzrayim. My Yitzias Mitzrayim in Nisan, in the same way as Yitzias Mitzrayim, besides for it actually happening in Nisan, besides for that, we actually count the years starting every Nisan from new. Then, and we'll soon see how we know that, but we know that as a fact, that we don't say, yeah, we went out in Nisan, but every Tishri we start a new year, which means 6 months after Yitzias Mitzrayim. When it comes to Aleph Tishri, we'll say, oh, now it's already the 2nd year after Yitzias Mitzrayim, even though it's only 6 months later. We don't say that. But Yitzias Mitzrayim, we know, we count always from Nisan. Af Malchus Shlomo min Nisan, from the fact that the Pasuk puts the two together to teach us that the years of the kings of Shlomo Melech are also counted always from Nisan. Asks the Gemara, Yitzias Mitzrayim gufa minalon de Nisan moninon. How do you know that Yitzias Mitzrayim you always count starting from Nisan? Dilma mitishri moninon. Maybe that since Tishri is the beginning of the year from the creation of the world, which was created in Tishri, so maybe even though we went out of Mitzrayim in Nisan, but every Tishri the number goes up 1, not Nisan. And if Yitzias Mitzrayim, we count the years from Yitzias Mitzrayim every Tishri, then the Melachim would also be counted from Tishri. Says the Gemara, Lo yisol kodaitoch, don't entertain such an idea, because it says in another pasuk, Vayal Aaron HaKohen el Hoyer HaHor, Aaron HaKohen went up to Hoyer HaHor, the mountain, Al Pi Hashem, under the instructions of Hashem, Vayomos Shom, and he died there, B'shnas ha'arboim, in the 40th year, and here it's explicit, 40 years from when? L'tzeis b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. From when Klal Yisrael went out of Mitzrayim, b'chodesh hachamishi, this was the month of be'echod lachodesh, on the 1st of Av, the 40th year after coming out of Mitzrayim, Aaron HaKohen passed away on Hoyer HaHor. Orsiv, and there's another pasuk that says, Vayhi ba'arboim shana, again in the 40th year, the same year, ba'ashtei chodesh, in the 11th month, which is the month of Shvat, be'echod lachodesh, on the 1st of Shvat, Diber Moshe el Bnei Yisrael k'chol asher tziva Hashem oiseh aleihem. So this is talking about Shvat, and we'll soon see that it's clear that this pasuk, which was in Shvat of the 40th year, was after the pasuk that we mentioned before it, which was Av of that same year. So what do we see here clearly? Midakoi ba'Av, since when they were in the month of Av, which is when Aaron HaKohen passed away, v'korei leishnas arboim, it was considered the 40th year. V'koi b'Shvat, and a number of months later, there was Av, there was the whole Av, Elul, Tishri, Cheshvan, Kislev, Tevis, Shvat, 7 months later, or 6 months later, half a year later, we're at the beginning of Shvat, v'korei leishnas arboim. The year didn't go up 1 between Av and Shvat. Michlal, so what do we see from there? That the years of counting from Yitzias Mitzrayim did not go up 1 between Av and Shvat. So Michlal, we see from there the Rosh Hashanah Lav Tishriyu. Rosh Hashanah, the new year of when we count Yitzias Mitzrayim, certainly not in Elul, because Elul is after Av. If it would be in Elul, then it wouldn't be Shvat of the 40th year, it would be Shvat of the 41st year. Not in Elul, not in Tishri, not in Cheshvan, not in Kislev, not in Teves, and not in Shvat. None of these 6 months do we start counting the years of Yitzias Mitzrayim. Because if we did, then what happened in Shvat that year would be considered the next year. Assuming that Shvat is the Shvat mentioned in the pasuk is after the Av mentioned in the pasuk, and we're soon going to determine that to be the case. Says the Gemara, Bishlei Mehech, the first pasuk when it speaks about Aaron HaKohen passing away in Av, it says explicitly Mefarish Yitzias Mitzrayim. It says in the pasuk, Vayomos Shom B'shnas Arboim L'tzeis B'nei Yisrael Me'eretz Mitzrayim. Elohai, but that second pasuk, which is the Shvat of that year, it just says Vayhi ba'arbaim shana, the 40th year. It doesn't say the 40th year of Yitzias Mitzrayim. Maybe we're counting 40 years. Mimaydi Yitzias Mitzrayim dilma lakomas hamishkan. Maybe we're talking about the 40th year after the construction of the Mishkan. The construction of the Mishkan was the second year after they went out of Mitzrayim. It was a year later. So it could be that indeed Tishri is the beginning of the new year of counting years from Yitzias Mitzrayim, and indeed the Av is the 40th year when they went out of Mitzrayim, and Shvat, which is after the Tishri, is the 40th year from the second year when they went out of Mitzrayim, which is the 41st year after they went out of Mitzrayim. So you don't have any proof that Tishri is not the Rosh Hashanah for Melachim, or Rosh Hashanah, or when we start counting from Yitzias Mitzrayim. Says the Gemara, no, that can't be. Rav Papa is going to say this a number of times in this sugya. Rav Papa, he had a tradition from his Rebbes that whenever it speaks about the years, whenever it says shnas, then we learn out when it's ambiguous, when it's not clear where we count the years from. We learn it out from places where it is clear. Rav Papa, shnas esrim, like we're going to see later. Rav Papa is going to say that in one place, when regarding a 20th year, we're going to see that later. We learn out one to the other. Hochanami, so to here. It says once shnas arboim and again shnas arboim. Shnas arboim. L'gzeira shava. We learned one from the other. In the same way as shnas arboim by Aaron HaKohen, it says explicitly it was the 40th year from when they went out of Mitzrayim. So too, in that Shvat, where it mentions Arboim Shana and doesn't mention which year it was, Rav Papa says it's to tell us it's the same year as when it speaks about the 40th year that tells us it was explicitly from Yitzias Mitzrayim. So you see clearly that the Av and the Shvat are the same, both counted from Yitzias Mitzrayim, and they're obviously in the same year, which means the year didn't go up one between Av and Shvat, which means Elul, Tishri, Cheshvan, Kislev, Teves, and Shvat are certainly not the new starting of a count of Yitzias Mitzrayim, and therefore we assume that Nisan is the time where we count Yitzias Mitzrayim, and coming back to Shlomo Melech, that in the same pasuk compares the years of Shlomo to the years of Yitzias Mitzrayim. Like Yitzias Mitzrayim, we assume that Rosh Hashanah is on the 1st of Nisan, so too the Melachim are on the 1st of Nisan. Ma'akan Yitzias Mitzrayim, Afkan Yitzias Mitzrayim. All that remains to be determined is who told you that the Av, what actually happened when Aaron HaKohen passed away, who says that that was in the Av, that was before the Pasuk that speaks about the Shvat. Maybe indeed Tishri is when the new year, and then first you had the Shvat, because after Tishri you've got Shvat. Tishri, Cheshvan, Kislev, Teves, Shvat. First the Shvat, and almost a year later in Av, which is still considered the same year, is when Aaron HaKohen passed away. So maybe if the sequence of events are assumed to be the other way around, you wouldn't have proof that Tishri is not the beginning of the year. Mimai de Maisa de Av Kodim, who told you that the incident with Aaron HaKohen passing away was first? Dilma Maisa de Shvat Kodim, maybe what the incident of the 11th month, the month of Shvat, maybe that came first. Says the Gemara, Lo Yisol Kadaitach, that cannot be. Why? Because immediately the pasuk after it speaks about the Shvat, which is the first of Shvat of that 40th year. The very next pasuk, what does it say? It was after they smote, they hit a Sichon Meluch HaAmoiri, Sichon the king of Amoiri, Ash Yeshev b'Cheshbon, V'Esoig Melech HaBoshan, Ash Yeshev b'Ashtoris b'Edrei. So it says explicitly that the Shvat was after Sichon was killed. Acharei HaKoisei Sichon. V'chinoch nafshei da'arin, when Aaron HaKohen passed away, which was the previous pasuk, the Av of that year, Akate hava Sichon kayon. Sichon was still alive. And therefore that the pasuk of Av must have been before the pasuk of Shvat. So it cannot be that the Rosh Hashanah of those years, that means the beginning of counting of the Yitzias Mitzrayim years, cannot have been between Av and Shvat. How do we know? Because it says in the pasuk, Vayishma Haknani, and we've suddenly jumped from Sichon to Knan. The Gemara is going to address that soon. Vayishma Knani Melech Arod, the Knani, the king of Arod, Yeshiv HaNegev, he heard Kivo Yisrael Derech HaAsorim Vayilochem Yisrael Vayish Menu Shevi. The Knani came and they waged war against Klal Yisrael. The question is, Ma Shamu Ashoma? It says, Vayishma HaKnani. The Knani heard. What did he hear? Shoma Shemeis Aaron. He heard that Aaron HaKohen passed away. And we know that the clouds, the protective clouds surrounding Klal Yisrael were in the merit of Aaron HaKohen. When he passed away, they left. Shoma Shemeis Aaron. V'nistal Kohanei HaKoved. He heard that suddenly the heavenly protection around Klal Yisrael had gone away. Ukasovar. And this king of Canaan, he assumed that Nitna Rishus Lilochem B'Yisrael. This must be a sign that we have permission to fight Klal Yisrael. V'hainu d'chsiv. And that's indeed what it says in the Pasuk. Vayiru kol ha'eda ki gova Aaron. Which the literal translation of this would be that the whole nation, they saw ki gova Aaron, that Aaron had passed away. V'omer Bavo said, Al tikru vayiru. Don't read it vayiru meaning they saw that Aaron passed away. Elo you should read it vayira'u. They were seen, because before that nobody could see them. They were surrounded by clouds. Now the clouds had went away. They were now seen. And why is Rabbi telling us to read the pasuk that not they saw, rather they were seen? Because we have the word ki. Vayiru kol ha'eda ki gova Aaron. What does gova Aaron mean? Aaron passed away. What's the ki? Because Rosh Lakish tells us, the Omar Rosh Lakish teaches us that the word ki, mashamesh, is used b'daled lashonis in one of four different ways. I, which means if, dilma, maybe, elo, but, and daha, because. And if we assume that we have to read ki as meaning one of these four, then you can't say vayiru, they saw. They saw, that means the whole nation saw, ki gava Aaron. How would we explain ki? But now says Rabbi, no. Read it vayero, they were seen, ki, because gava Aaron passed away, and the clouds went away, and therefore Klal Yisrael were now revealed, and they could be seen. So you see clearly that only when Aaron passed away, then the Knani, Melech Arod, saw, and they came to fight Klal Yisrael. And we assume that this Knani is Sichon. We'll soon see why. So it must be that Aaron passed away before Sichon was destroyed. So since it says in that Shvat Pasuk, it says the Pasuk after that, it says, Acharei HaKoisei Sichon, it must be that Aaron HaKohen Pasuk, which is Av that year, passed away before what happened in Shvat that year, where Sichon, after Sichon had been destroyed. Says the Gemara, Midomi, how can you compare this Vayishma Knani and prove from there that Aaron HaKohen definitely passed away before the incident with Knani? But how do you prove from there that Achrei HaKoisei Sichon? How can you prove from there that Sichon was still alive when Aaron passed away? Midomi Hosam Knan, that's talking about Knan. Hocha Sichon, here we're talking about Sichon. Maybe Sichon was killed before Aaron passed away. Says the Gemara, no. Tana, we learned in a Brisa, Hu Sichon, Hu Arod, Hu Knan. It's all the same person. Sichon, the reason he was called Sichon, Shadoima Lesioch Bamidbar. He was compared to a desert young horse. That's why he was called Sichon. Canaan, why was he called Canaan? Al Shem Al Chusay, that was his kingdom. He was reigning, he was ruling in the place called Canaan. Uma Shemai, what was his real name? Arod Shemai, his name was Arod. And Nikodam, others say a different version. Arod, the reason he was called Arod, Shadoima La'aroid Bamidbar, is compared to a wild donkey in the desert. Canaan, he was called Canaan al Shem al Chusay because of the kingdom. Uma Shemai, his real name, Sichon Shemai. But either way, we see here that Canaani Melech Arod is Sichon. And he only came to wage war after Aaron HaKohen passed away, when the clouds revealed Klal Yisrael. So it must be that Aaron passed away before that. So it must be that Av was before the Shvat. If Av was before the Shvat, then the new year, when we count the years from Yetzias Mitzrayim, could not have been anywhere between Elul and Shvat, including Tishri. So when it says in the pasuk we started with that we compared when Rabbi Yochanan brought this pasuk, that we compared the years of Shlomo HaMelech to the years of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Like Yetzias Mitzrayim, at this point we assume Nisan to be the time where we change the year. Every Nisan we start a new year, second year, third year, fourth year from Yetzias Mitzrayim. So to Malachim is in Nisan. Now, even though we've only ruled out Elul, Tishri, Cheshvan, Kislev, Teves, and Shvat, we assume it to be Nisan. And in the next Gemara, Mitzvah Hashem, we're going to learn, how do you know it's not Iyar Sivan, Tammuz of or Adar? And we're going to learn Mitzvah Hashem that in the next Gemara.